This analysis video is for Jeremy and David. So, Jeremy, good to see you again. Let's kind of look at some of the stuff that we've worked on the last week or so. Over on the left is the swing that you guys were ecstatic with, and then over on the right was the next day. And yes, what a difference a day makes. So let's see kind of the big picture first of kind of what's different, and then we'll get into some of the details. So as we get up towards the top of the swing, you'll see that before he starts to change direction, we can still see the club kind of on the top side of his forearm, so a little bit more closer to across the line, and you can see over here, whatever degree change that is, you can see that it's a little bit shallower. And then as he comes down, you'll still see decent lower body rotation, but if we're using that thigh parallel checkpoint, I'd say it's probably pretty close to there. And if we look at it over here on the left, it's probably that frame or even the one before it. So it's kind of one of those two. And so we can see that there's a little bit earlier lower body action, and as a result you can see that when he's at this thigh parallel position, you can see over on the right his elbow is already kind of up against his hip, where here it's a little bit higher up. And we'll talk a little bit more as we get into the analysis. So then as a result, I'll give you kind of a second little checkpoint. Not everyone is as good at this. It really depends on how they control their face to path relationship, but looking at when the chest is parallel to the target line. So roughly it's going to be somewhere around shaft parallel to the ground. So you can see roughly when that left shoulder disappears, he's kind of at that position. So if we take this one down until that left shoulder disappears, to me it looks like it's probably that frame right there. So you can see that the club is already closer to impact. So that means over on the left he's had more body rotation earlier from a little bit more on top of it kind of club position at the top. And then as a result, as he comes through, you'll see the impact position. You can see that there's a little bit of more daylight here over on the right. So basically his arms are still swinging a little bit more kind of out at the target, where over here on the left, because his upper body had turned a little bit more, you'll see that the handle works just a little bit more left, and you can see that club exiting low and left, where over here on the right it's exiting just a little bit higher. So you can see that club a little bit lower, more left, over on the right a little bit higher, more right. So one of the things that I want to approach is this arm movement during transition, now that you got a little bit of time after this tournament. So what we'll see on the right is you can see that elbow is working more down towards, if you imagine the pelvis as like a rectangle, it's working more towards the middle of the hip or the middle of the pelvis. When we look at this one over here, you can see that right elbow is working more almost towards the front corner or the point of the hip, technically called the ASIS, so that bony part of your hip. So you can basically see that over on the right, the arms are working much more vertically down, where on the left they're working more out in front of the chest. So we'll describe a couple different ways, but it's basically going to feel like the arm is working more like straight in front of your sternum or in front of your chest, as opposed to straight down towards your hip. So we'll bring up Sergio and possibly a couple others and some of your old swings and take a look at these for comparison. So I figured before we take a look at some of the others, here we can just kind of look at what we've been able to work on. You can see there's the thigh parallel, so that's much later, and if we go until chest parallel, where that left shoulder disappears, it's even further down, kind of right in here. So you can see we've done a better job of sequencing and getting the body to kind of lead the swing. Here you can see that elbow working more straight down towards that side of the hip, like almost towards the side of the body. That's not necessarily the worst thing, but for what we're trying to get a little bit more on top of the shaft, that's going to make it harder. Now if we compare that to one of his older swings, there's that thigh parallel that he did so well. Now if we get him to right about there is where the chest appears to be parallel, and then as a result you can see pretty good movement of that handle going left. And if we're looking at the elbow movement, if we go up towards the top, you can see that that elbow doesn't really work straight towards his side. It's working more, instead of working straight down, it's kind of working out in front and across his body. That will also help him get this position back where he's on top of the shaft, as he demonstrated earlier this week. So if we take a look at Sergio, he does err towards that laid off position, but he does a good job of not letting that elbow get too far behind him, so he does that good kind of windshield wiper move. He just doesn't have as much of the pronation that you guys like. And you can see that his elbow does tend to drop, but it drops at a slower rate. It's not so much being pulled down as it's kind of falling down, because what you'll see is his thighs reach that checkpoint, right when his left arm's parallel to the ground, and then he's a little late, but he's pretty good. His chest is in that parallel zone right about here, so pretty close to shaft parallel. And then what we'll be able to see, which we'll look at one of his other face-on videos, because that can help out. There's a swing vision where they're doing a, just the standard analysis of look how narrow he gets that arc. But what you'll see is, even though that elbow is a little bit on the side, during the release he does a really good job of getting it kind of past his body, more out in front of his chest. That's another thing that helps keep the path of the club working more left. If the arms tend to get a little bit behind, that can cause the path to swing a little bit more into out. So the big thing will be working on the downswing and kind of that white movement of that right arm. So instead of letting it drop towards that hip, working it a little bit more kind of towards the sternum. That'll help encourage some of the upper body rotation. But just as a little recap of the backswing and what happened in the difference, if we look at the one, actually let's look at the good one on the left. So he keeps it pretty closed, and then you'll see that right about here, that elbow, or the hands just kind of pivot around that elbow, so the elbow is doing that good little external rotation or windshield wiper move, where what you'll see here is that elbow doesn't really create the pivot point. It just kind of keeps sliding, keeps working, and that's why his arms are a little bit more, in a flat position. The club is a little bit more laid off. So basically what would have happened if he was trying to duplicate this picture over on the left is, once he got to about here, that elbow would just serve as the pivot point, and that wrist would do the little pronation move, where his elbow kind of kept sliding, so it got a little bit more internally rotated, and he didn't have quite as much of the pronation. But I think that overall the big purpose of, or what you want to continue working on in the downswing, is getting that body to sequence and power the swing a little bit more, and then working on that trail elbow path, what I call the wipe, which he does a better job of doing here, even if he's unaware that he's doing it. So as always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message, but looks like he's making some progress, and hopefully he plays well this weekend, and then we can just kind of take some of those next steps and get it all cleaned up before the fall season.